Hello, welcome back to the Deep 404. This is going to be the weekly Ukraine war update. I'm going to be drawing from the Russian Ministry of Defense reporting for some of the numbers that I'll give here, and also just a collection of reports captured from Ukrainian, Russian Telegram channels, that sort of thing, social media. So I'll start up in the Kupyansk direction and work our way down south and to the west, down to Kherson and the Black Sea area. I have a couple of videos to show, so just bear with me while I get this set up as we go. But we'll start up in the Kupyansk direction, and let's just, here we go. So in Kupyansk, an example here of just some of the other dangers of war beyond obviously just the fighting itself. Here we have footage of a couple of Maxpro vehicles being used in Kupyansk, and while obviously engaging Russian troops, you can see both the Maxpros and some of the men on the ground are firing. One of the Maxpros, in an attempt to reposition and then get out of the area, manages to drive over two of the Ukrainian soldiers that have just disembarked from the vehicle itself. Now, I cannot confirm what has happened to those men. It appears from this footage that both of them are still alive, but both of them have clearly been injured quite badly. You see them trying to crawl away. Just as I say, an example that in your everyday life you need to be careful around vehicles and things like that. When you are in war, of course, these things are just an added danger and hazard to your life. Anyhow, in the Kupyansk direction, this is over the last week, so this is the 18th to 24th of November, summary details from the Russian Ministry of Defense. The area where the Zapad Group of Forces have been working, they have reportedly repelled 13 Ukrainian attacks in the area. They have used airstrikes and artillery fire against the AFU, the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the AFU's 10th Mountain Assault Brigade, the 57th Motorised Infantry Brigade, the 14th, 43rd, 53rd and 67th mechanised brigades. So we can see there is a concentration of Ukrainian forces in the Kupyansk area, where the Russians have for some time been applying great pressure and moving their way slowly towards the Oskol River. This fighting has occurred in the areas of Sinkovka, Ivanovka, Zagoruykovka, Kislovka and Kupyansk in the Kharkov region. Reportedly, the enemy losses, or in this case, this is Russian reporting, so when they refer to the enemy, they're referring to Ukrainian. This is not me choosing the word enemy. The Ukrainian losses were more than 305 Ukrainian troops, 2 armoured fighting vehicles, 16 motor vehicles, and 7 field artillery guns. Now, if you'll just bear with me again for a moment while I get to the next item here. This is moving to the Krasny Liman area, and in the Krasny Liman area we have some footage. Now let me just show this to you. So in the Krasny Liman, let me show you the footage, not myself. In the Krasny Liman area, we have footage here where the TOS-1 flamethrower systems have been employed in this area. These are the thermobaric weapons. They launched from an MLRS, multiple launch rocket system, firing multiple of these rockets. The warheads on them are thermobaric warheads, so they are warheads that when they explode, they release a fuel-air mix into the environment, which will then flow down into trenches, in through doorways, in through vehicles. It's a gas, effectively, which then a few moments later, after it's had time to dispel through the localized area, it ignites. And as you saw before on that video footage, the effect that it has is quite devastating over a large area. You can also see in this video footage that when these TOS ones explode, you notice the shock waves emanating out from as well. So there's the initial flame burst, which is incredibly hot, and then the accompanying shock wave of these is lethal to humans and has an unusual physical effect where it causes damage where the materials of the body change state. So as you move within the body from flesh and muscle to organs, from bone to muscle, those changes in state is where the shock wave seems to act on the body and causes terrible destruction to the organs of the human body. In this area of Krasny Liman is where the Zapad Group of Forces operate. They have been operating with, supported by Army aviation, heavy artillery, and of course the flamethrower systems. They have this week repelled 10 attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces in this area. These attacks and the repelled attacks and assaults have been against the AFU's 5th National Guard Brigade, the 12th Special Operations Brigade, the 27th, the 47th and 67th Mechanised Brigades. In addition to this, the Russians have reportedly delivered strikes against the AFU's 31st National Guard Brigade, 117th and 125th Territorial Defence Brigades. Close to the townships and settlements of Torskoy, Krasny Liman, Serebryanka and Grigorovka in the Donetsk People's Republic. The Serebryanka is the forested areas which we see some of this fighting happening around here. The forestry, which has been in many cases a great defensive position used by both Russians and Ukrainians, in the summertime has been very useful because it is green, covered in foliage. You're able to hide equipment and men in there. As we move into the winter, any deciduous trees in the area, of course, will drop their leaves, meaning that this means for concealment will be reduced as the winter approaches. The Ministry of Defence reports that in this area of Krasny Liman, 74 Ukrainian troops were killed and wounded in the last week. 6 armoured fighting vehicles were destroyed, 15 motor vehicles and 3 field artillery guns. Now we'll just move on from here to the Donetsk region. And here I have some footage. Let me just start this again for you. Footage of the Russians beginning to use cluster munitions. So Russia has begun to deploy cluster munitions in this conflict. There are multiple videos coming out now, and from these videos you can just see the range over which these operate. I'm not going to show some of the other video which has come out accompanying this, immediately accompanying the release of these videos showing the cluster munitions in use. The videos which are coming out from now numerous areas in Ukraine are of large numbers of Ukrainian soldiers, servicemen who have been killed, being carried by their comrades and piled up inside buildings or in the back of vehicles. But clearly we are seeing the impacts of these large cluster munitions used by the Russians. It appears that while the Ukrainians are using the American-supplied cluster 155mm rounds, which are launched by artillery, what the Russians are employing here are far larger in scale. These, I believe, are being dropped from perhaps the chassis or the shell of the 500-kilogram bomb. So this is a much larger cluster munition piece of ordnance which is being used by the Russians against the Ukrainians, and these things spread out over the area of a couple of soccer fields, I believe, is what you're seeing there where those explosions are happening. Okay. In the Donetsk area, there is also, interestingly, some reporting of a Ukrainian surveillance drone that has been shot down by the Russians. This is only a small thing, but disguised as an eagle. It appears to be almost like a printed kite-like design, which has been attached to the drone in some way or another, so as to try to disguise from the Russians what it is as it's flying around. Wasn't successful, clearly, but it gives you an indication of the adaptation that you'll start to see. And I imagine it won't be too long before you start to see things like, you may have seen them before in some areas, things that look like an owl or a crow, a plastic-bodied device which you'll put outside a property, and they have mounted inside them a security camera. So it looks like there's just a bird resting in a tree, but really it's a security camera. I imagine that we will soon start to see drones which have a lightweight 3D printed plastic body of a bird, so that when they're seen from a distance, they do appear to be a bird rather than a surveillance drone. Also on the topic of drones, there is some footage today of a Russian FPV drone striking 3 Ukrainian soldiers in a trench. Now, that in itself is not new. We have many videos of FPV drones being used against soldiers in trenches. What is telling about this video is that there are at least 3 versions of this video from 3 different angles of this drone striking these 3 men. And this just gives you an indication of how prevalent drones have become in this conflict. If the Russians are able to have at least 3 drones filming this one non-critical strike in an area on 3 men, it just makes you wonder how many drones there are up there in the sky at any one time. I have heard reports on Ukrainian Telegram channels from Ukrainian soldiers that they believe that the Russians have 1 drone for every man on the ground. That's how many are in the air, and there are just swarms of them. This sort of thing is going to increase with what's coming out in terms of the new Lancet drones, where they will now hunt in packs. The promotional footage I've seen of this shows a group of 7 or 8 Lancets, the new version Lancets, flying in an area together, able to target and track multiple targets on the ground, and then make a decision and share the role of attacking them between them. So if they find 3 or 4 vehicles in an area, they won't all hit one. They will decide between themselves who will target what, and then as in a group will attack them. In the Donetsk region, the Russian Ministry of Defense reports, this is the area where the Yug Group of Forces operate. They have this week repelled 22 enemy attacks. 22 Ukrainian attacks. They have been operating in the areas of Marinka, Kupyansk, Vasylykovka, Artyomsk or Bakhmut, Andriivka and Klishchiivka. The Andriivka and Klishchiivka are on the south of Bakhmut, and while the Ukrainians in their offensive fought very hard and lost a lot of men to make advancements in these areas, even pushing the Russians out of Andriivka back over the railway line. Now, Andriivka has returned to the grey zone. Now it has returned to the grey zone. The Russians haven't moved back into Andriivka for the reason that it's such a small settlement. There is nothing there to defend. There is no coverage there. It's now just a field of rubble. However, it is in the grey zone, and the Ukrainians are not able to retake it and get back to the railway line. Klishchiivka, similar thing. There are attacks on Klishchiivka by the Russians, pushing the Ukrainians back out of this area. Now, in Klishchiivka and Andriivka, these were areas where the Ukrainians were able to claim some small, hard-fought, hard-won success by getting to the railway line in Andriivka, In theory, they had a slightly elevated position and a slightly covered position to protect them and perhaps protect the movement of vehicles. They've now lost that in that area. The Russian Ministry of Defense reports that 1,680 Ukrainian troops killed and wounded in the Donetsk area in the last week. 4 tanks, 10 armoured fighting vehicles, 18 motor vehicles and 14 field artillery guns destroyed in the fighting. In the southern Donetsk direction, where the Vostok Group of Forces are operating, they have repelled 2 enemy attacks in this area. This has been around Staromayorsk, Novodonetskoy and Konstantinovka. The Ukrainian losses amounted to more than 625 Ukrainian troops, 7 armed fighting vehicles, 16 motor vehicles, as well as 13 field artillery guns. Now in the Zaporozhye direction, fighting continues here in the Varemka ledge, or the Varemka salient. This is around Urozhaina. This morning, there are reports that Ukrainians have sent 2 motorised infantry platoons reinforced with tanks into battle near Urozhaina. And subsequent reporting is that those attacks were repulsed. The Ukrainians suffered some number of losses and they have had to roll back. The tanks have reversed out of the area. The head of the civil military administration, or the governor of the Ukrainian-controlled Zaporozhye region, Malashko, has reported the discovery of 300 tons of humanitarian aid in the area that were transferred to the Zaporozhye region last year by Western partners, and these have reportedly spoiled and gone off. It's not indicated in the reporting I saw what the goods were, but they have reportedly spoiled, and this being reported by the Ukrainians themselves due to negligence of some officials in the regional administration. No information given on exactly what the negligence was, but it does make you wonder what is happening that you can, in the middle of a war where humanitarian aid items you would imagine would be vital, that you could somehow have 300 tons of them go to waste. So if this reporting is true, pardon me, it does make me think that perhaps some element of corruption may have been involved here, in that someone was storing and stockpiling this for future sale somewhere, black market sale, and perhaps that had somehow been stalled or unable to occur, and perhaps that's why it has been lost. I don't know. I'm speculating, but there's been plenty of reports of corruption in terms of goods and aid material and weapons in Ukraine during this conflict. Also, in the area of Zaporozhye, reports that Ukrainian forces in Zaporozhye have seen the use of the Russian tactic, which employing what's known as the double strike tactic. This has been employed with the use of Iskander missiles, where an Iskander missile is fired at a target, hitting the target, then given a planned delay period, a second Iskander is sent to the same destroyed target, not to destroy the target, but to destroy the military forces that will have congregated around the target to either investigate, repair, see what's available, or look for survivors, I suppose, that sort of thing. So reports are coming out that this has been used by the Russians in the Zaporozhye region recently. In the area of Robotne and Verbova, the forces of the 108th Russian Airborne Assault Brigade and the 7th Guards Mountain Airborne Assault Division, they have reportedly regained previously lost positions north of Verbova. Now, Verbova, if you remember, is the closest point to the first line of the main Russian, the Surovikin defense line, that main line of defense that was built up by the Russians before the Ukrainians embarked upon their June offensive. So there has been a lot of attention on Verbova from the Ukrainians trying to get across that line and be able to claim that they have breached the Surovikin line. Now, that hasn't happened, but this is why we've still seen so much intense fighting in this area. So reportedly now that I'm just reading here from a Telegram channel. Previously, a forest plantation area was occupied by Ukrainian forces, after which the paratroopers from the Russian 108th Airborne Assault Regiment engaged Ukrainian positions with volumetric explosion ammunition. In this case, I believe they're talking about the TOS-1 flamethrower systems. After which they carried out assault operations to regain control of the forest belt area. The Ukrainians, having suffered losses, carried out evacuation operations. They then began retaliatory shelling against Russian positions with artillery and cluster munitions. The Russians then, in turn, report that they are working with D-30 cannon artillery, drones with drops. In this case, I believe they're talking about drones dropping munitions, 120mm mortars and BMD-4Ms. So the fighting around Robotne and Verbova is still very intense. If you just try to imagine what it must be like, if you look back to that footage we saw before of the thermobarics going off and the effect they have on people, surviving that somehow in the area that has happened, whatever shape it might be that you are in, to then have your enemy turn up and assault the area with armoured vehicles and machinery, machine guns and what have you. Honestly, it must just be hell on earth surviving through that. The Ministry of Defence reports that in this Zaporozhye area, 11 attacks of the armed forces of Ukraine near Robotne, or Rabotino, and Verbova have been encountered by the Russians. The Russians have inflicted damage on the AFU's 71st Jaeger Brigade, the 82nd Assault Brigade, 33rd, 65th and 118th Mechanised Brigades near Malaya Tomachka, Uspinovka and Nova Andreevka in the Zaporozhye region. Reportedly, the Ukrainian losses in Zaporozhye over the last week are over 435 troops killed and wounded, 3 tanks, 21 armoured vehicles, 22 motor vehicles, and 4 field artillery pieces. Now, let me just get one more video for us to watch. I could really do with a producer to help me with this. Anyhow, this footage here, which we're seeing here. Just look to where the red cross is, just to the right of the red cross around that area. This is a Fab 500 bomb. Let me make that a little larger for you and replay that. That's the explosion of a Fab 500 bomb. I am, given that this is happening in the Kherson region, I'm suggesting that this is night vision footage, possibly here, taken at night time. While I don't have scale on there, the Fab 500s are a very large bomb. You even see after the initial detonation there, you see that out in the water on the right, there's debris gets blasted out that far. So I'm imagining that sort of anything within this range of from the left-hand side of the red cross you can see out to the middle of this river on the right is in the zone of danger zone from this bomb blast. So in the Kherson direction, at Krinky, heavy shelling and bombing of Ukrainian forces continues in Krinky. However, reports from the Russians are that the Ukrainian forces remain there. They have not been able to remove them all and push them all back over the Dnieper River. Ukrainian units have made more unsuccessful attempts to land additional infantry troops on the islands and the left bank of the Dnieper. I do, and I've said this before, I struggle with what the point of this operation is. The Ukrainians don't seem to have the number of forces to make a significant attack across the Dnieper. They don't appear to have any capability to support a successful movement across the Dnieper. In the Zaporozhye region, in Pyatikhatki and Robotny, the Ukrainian troops are being held and pushed back. There's just a small number of men coming across trying to resupply this bridgehead. As I've said before, perhaps this holds some PR or media advantage for the Ukrainians, where they can claim that they are across the Dnieper and they are fighting in Zaporozhye, and that may be it. But for the poor Ukrainian soldiers who are trying to hold this position, coming under Fab 500 bombing day and night, really, I think it's a poor use of their lives. I saw somewhere just recently, if you want to, defend a river is a great place. If you want to defend, set yourself up on one side of the river and defend that river. Use it as a natural barrier. But if you want to try to get across and fight on the other side of that river, you are at a serious disadvantage. You need to amass enough troops that you can get across the river, get your heavy equipment across the river with you, and then open up a route across the river. Now, at this stage, the boats that are being used here are small boats bringing across small numbers of men, some barges trying to bring across heavy pieces of equipment, but thus far there have been no reports of heavy pieces of equipment getting across. They seem to be being stopped by the Russians as they attempt to get across the river. Also, in Kherson is where we have seen the first video footage arriving of nighttime FPV strikes. So the Russians have gained capability on the FPV drones where they can now put night sights, night vision on them. And so the one period of time where the Ukrainians in this area had some ability to perhaps operate in a somewhat undetected or unharassed way, now they are suffering pinpoint targeted FPV drone strikes even at night time. So the Ministry of Defense reporting in Kherson indicates that the armed forces of Ukraine have lost up to 405 troops in this week because of this attempt to hold this small bridgehead near Krinky. 11 field artillery guns, 12 boats, 26 motor vehicles have been destroyed. And in addition, the Ministry of Defense of Russia reports that 39 Ukrainian servicemen have surrendered in this direction during the week. I'm not at all surprised that Kherson is the one area which is mentioned here where surrender has occurred. I could imagine being isolated like this out on the east bank or the left bank of the Dnieper River. You would feel completely isolated, and surrender would look like a good idea when you have Fab 500s like that dropping on you at night time. I have read some unsettling news about the inability of the 110th in Avdiivka, the Ukrainian Avdiivka brigade, in the 110th, that while they and the 53rd have been making videos to the commanders saying, we're out of here, this is just a slaughter, we need to get out of here, we want to retreat. Reportedly, there are now Ukrainian anti-retreat forces who have lined up behind the 110th and are stopping them from having any ability to be able to move out of the area they're fighting in Avdiivka. Finally, the reporting from the Ministry of Defence, they are reporting that a Ukrainian S-300 air defence system has been destroyed this week, and 2 US-made AN/TPQ-50 counter-battery radar stations have been destroyed. Again, many times I've mentioned these are vitally important to the Ukrainians in the attempt to win the counter-battery duels, or at least keep a balance with the Russians. Losing these counter-battery radar stations is devastating for the Ukrainians wherever this is happening. In the Black Sea Fleet's naval aircraft have reportedly destroyed 12 Ukrainian uncrewed surface vehicles. So these are water drones. Some of these are semi-submersible. These are, by the sounds of things, being surface vehicles, are possibly the jet ski type or the small speedboat type drones, which are packed with explosives and then remotely controlled and driven across the surface of the water. No reports of these having made any successful attacks on any Russian shipping during this week. The Ministry of Defence is reporting that this week 1 MiG-29 Ukrainian aircraft has been shot down, and 1 Ukrainian Mi-8 helicopter has been shot down by the Air Force. 15 HIMARS projectiles, 2 Neptune anti-ship missiles, and 176 unmanned aerial vehicles have been shot down. Just finally, just to summarise and finish off for this weekly summary, in this week, over 4,000 Ukrainian troops have been reported lost or killed by the Russian Ministry of Defence. If you believe those numbers, and I'm not saying you have to, but if you do believe this reporting, it is, as I say, it's consistent reporting. Last week, it was over 5,000. So at this rate, Ukraine is losing somewhere between 19 and 20,000 men killed and wounded per month, which is getting up to somewhere around 230, 250,000 men and women now killed and wounded, because Ukraine now has a number of videos starting to come out now of women on the front line, in the trenches, at the front line. One I saw yesterday was a woman on the front line with 2 injured men in front of her, someone behind her. She was saying, look, we've got to get out of here. A Russian tank is approaching. You could hear the Russian tank approaching. And the guy was saying, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to back out to. If it gets us, we're screwed. They're calling out for an AT, an anti-tank missile. And then she's shuffling along these 2 wounded men as they're trying to move, because it appears as though the tank may almost be driving over their position. So there are men and women now, no doubt, being lost on the front line for the Ukrainians at a rate of 250,000 a year. Now, as the fighting continues, the soldiers for Ukraine are becoming less experienced. They're being mobilised at a younger and older age. These aren't reservists and people who've done military training before. They are less well trained than the forces the Ukrainians started out with. Their defensive positions are weakening. Avdiivka is considered one of the most reinforced and fortified positions the Ukrainians have got, and it is going to be lost in the coming days and weeks. And part of the fact that they're losing defensive positions is because of this desire to defend and pour troops and energy and effort into defending Bakhmut and Avdiivka, instead of investing in developing fortified defensive positions behind the current front lines. This means that as the Russians push forward, the Ukrainians will be falling back to weakly defended positions. Combine that with winter is coming. Temperatures are already dropping below a few degrees, well below freezing overnight. This is going to continue. Snow is falling. Reports in the Kherson region that of these Ukrainian soldiers who are trying to defend Krinky, that after rains this week and freezing conditions, they are all now suffering frostbite to some level. They have no easy way to retreat or rotate or resupply in this area either. They're stuck there with frostbite. If they try to get across the river, they get struck by drones. If they stay where they are, they get struck by Fab 500s. Ukrainian channels are reporting that the Russians have been stockpiling missiles so that they can disable the Ukrainian energy grid this winter. The losses for the Ukrainians are only going to increase, and the rates of these losses will increase over the coming months. Now is the time. It has been for a long time, but now is the time for Ukraine to find a way to stop this fighting, whatever it takes. Try to negotiate, surrender. It needs to stop now. All right. Thank you for watching this. I hope you're enjoying the channel. If you haven't already subscribed and you are enjoying, please do subscribe and share the channel with your friends. Give it a like, whatever you feel like doing. I look forward to talking to you again soon.